Good afternoon and welcome. Today we have Lillian Montalto of Lillian Montalto Signature Properties in Andover, Massachusetts. Lillian has done over $3 billion in sales in her career that spanned over 30 years now. So Lillian, thank you for joining and welcome. Tell us a little bit about what's going on in the market up there in Andover.
Well, Kevin, even though there's a little bit more inventory than there has been in the past year or so, we're still seeing a depleted inventory, which keeps the prices high. We're still seeing bidding wars, a little bit less than what we were seeing, and I just think that has to do a little bit with maybe the time of year and certainly the interest rate hike that has prevented a lot of people from being in the price range that they prefer to be in. But honestly, I don't see, we're still so busy, thank goodness, and I see a lot of opportunity ahead in 2024.
That's great. That's great. I mean, look, you're in a market that the inventory is always tight up there. It's a great town, and are you focused exclusively on Andover, North Andover?
No, actually, with the limited inventory over the past 2.5 years, last year, my team sold and listed homes in 97 cities and towns. So we were as far south as Nantucket, as far north as Lake Winnipesaukee.
Wow.
So wherever wherever our people want us to be, that's where we.
That's great. That's great. So that I'm sure has changed over the course of time, right? As you've gotten more agents and you've kind of expanded your areas of coverage. But, if you wouldn't mind, share a little bit about your journey in real estate from where you started to how you've gotten to where you are today.
Sure. I started with the dinosaurs about 40 years ago. I'll make a statement that nobody's going to understand that's listening to this, I'm sure, the newer agents. But I've come from the threshold rule. Do you know what that is, Kevin?
The threshold rule.
Yeah.
I do not know what that is. No.
You're going to learn something today. So going back to the 70s and early 80s,
okay,
if you took a buyer into a property and crossed the threshold, that buyer was basically yours. That was the threshold rule. There was no buyer agency. There was so far from where we are today.
So if you walked somebody into a property over the threshold of the home,
that buyer was without written anything. But if I showed your listing and I walked that buyer across that threshold, and say you had an open house next weekend, and that buyer came back through the open house, that buyer would basically belong to me.
Wow.
It was a very unstated, unwritten, ridiculous, I guess, just a ridiculous situation, but that's the way that it was. So I've seen 5 grand market transitions in my career. And the big one, of course, was when agency came into play, which was in the 90s. I think it was maybe 1997 when that all started to change.
When buyer agency came in. So with the threshold rule, you would technically be a sub-agent of the seller?
Absolutely. Because prior to buyer agency, everybody was a sub-agent. Nobody really understood what that meant, but we were all working for everybody.
And that was, and buyer agency came in the late 90s.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
With everything that's going, and also there was no internet, there were no telephone, there were no cell phones, so we had to go to offices to pick up keys. There were no such thing as lock boxes.
Fax machines.
Dinosaurs.
Yeah.
That's okay.
I was probably late 90s getting into the industry, and I remember when I broke in, it was on the rental side, and any listings that were out there came through a fax machine. Each company or each owner would fax out their list for that day. So you'd be in there chomping at the bit, waiting to get the fax. And if there was good inventory on the sheet, you just keep the fax to yourself and then rush out and try and get it all done that day.
But there was the book too, because we'd get a new real estate book, MLS book, every Thursday. But by the time the book came out, everything was probably under agreement.
Picked over. Sure. Yeah. That was tough. So it went from sub-agency to now buyer agency coming in, then MLS comes into the picture, and then you're co-broking all of that. So as all these changes are going on, there had to have been people that are saying, this is going to be the thing that changes the industry. This is going to be the thing that changes the industry.
Absolutely.
And did you see that much change?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think the biggest transition was the internet. We were the key holders. We were the gatekeepers.
Right.
We had the keys to the gate for all the information.
Yeah.
Once the internet came into play, we were no longer the gatekeepers. People
Right.
were hiring us basically for our knowledge of the marketplace, our negotiating skills. That's what we bring our value to the table.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I feel like we're now in an age where the consumer's demanding that type of transparency, right? They're demanding the information. It's no longer hold the information close to your vest. It's get it out there to everybody. And to your point, be an advisor to these people. You're the one with 30 years of experience, right? So go out and share that with them and get them comfortable that they're making the right investment in the real estate that they're buying, right?
Absolutely.
That in a nutshell, that your philosophy is in alignment with what kind of final offer does. Right.
I'm such a believer of the transparency with final offer. I think it's the best thing that could happen to our industry.
I agree. There's so many different, as we've gone through this, I think there's so many different situations that final offer can solve for. And I think the most simplest form is just a transparency of, hey, who's on which side of the deal here? Is there any benefit to going to an agent directly? In most cases, it's not. Here's what the buyer's agent's doing. Here's what the seller's agent's doing. And I think it lays it out for the consumer to be able to trust in what their agent is actually, that the information that they're getting from their agent is actually true.
I think the other side of it is there are so many angry people over the past couple of years that have been in. I know I'm still working with buyers that I've written more than 15 or 20 offers for, and they've lost in a bidding war.
Yep.
And maybe they weren't ready to enter an offer with no financing contingency, with no inspection contingency. And sometimes you'd say to yourself, for lack of hearing back in a timely manner from the listing agent, sometimes you'd say, did my offer ever get presented?
Sure.
And you've got the buyer hanging and with biting their nails. Sometimes the offers would exceed up to a couple $100,000 in some cases. We had one property in Andover that sold $500,000 over ask.
Right.
So I think that for everybody involved, it gives everybody a fair and equal opportunity to own that property.
Yep.
If the highest bid is here and you have a few more pennies and you want to bring it here, then you've got that opportunity.
Yep.
And so I see that as definitely one of the next big changes in our industry.
I think what you're saying, it works for both sides, right? Because there's nothing more frustrating, I think, is when you're bidding on $1 million property or multi-million-dollar property, and it goes to a best and final, and you lose it by $10,000 or $5,000. And to your point, it gives that buyer the opportunity to come in and make an additional offer, and and then they can see if it exceeds what they're willing to pay. They know in real time why they've lost.
Exactly.
And there's no inside baseball. You guys do an amazing amount of business up there but what you would still be called a boutique firm, right? And you're competing with a lot of these bigger boxed agencies that have tons of agents. And I've run into it before in my career where I know that I'm not getting the same information that somebody that works with the listing broker is. It happens from time to time.
Exactly.
And I think final offer is a great equalizer there. And I think both sides of it end up winning because your buyer gets the transparency in to see it, and then the seller is the one that ends up getting a larger return on their investment.
Exactly. Plus that they also get the most favorable terms because they're laying the terms out if they so choose to do that.
Yeah.
And it's there. It's just transparent. It's beautiful.
And have you been able to use it on any of your listings so far?
We have. We're all certified. We're just doing our second listing now.
Okay.
I know that we don't have a great history, but you have to believe in it. If I didn't believe in it, I couldn't sell it to the consumer. I see it again. I think we'll be using it on all of our listings in the very near future.
That's great. And you talk about selling it to your listings, it's selling it to your clients. When you've gone in and talked about final offer, what type of reaction have you gotten from some of your clients so far?
So far, I've only gotten favorable responses. And people say, yeah, geez, that makes all the sense in the world. And because I'm excited about it, they get excited about it. Again, I think you have to understand, and you really have to internalize. You have to internalize the whole process so that you can properly communicate that to the sellers and the buyers. Because I'm going to be working with buyers that are going to be in the situation on other listings, on other companies' listings, and I want to be able to tell them why it's the best thing since chocolate cake.
That is true. I think from the buyer's standpoint, we've pulled, I think over the past month, we've pulled 400 or 500 agents, and we've asked them if they trust the agents that they're working with. And it was an astounding number. It was like 70 or 78% of people said no. And so when you think of that from people these are their colleagues within the industry, now to go out and try to ask a buyer then to trust somebody who the agent might not even trust.
Right.
And so I think there's a big solve there. And I think when you think about all of the friction that exists between agents in the industry, the majority of it stems from negotiations in spots where they don't feel like they were treated fairly.
Well, there's also a lot of ego that comes into play. That's where I see the transparency of final offer having the biggest benefit. That's all eliminated.
When you talk about ego, talk to me a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Have you ever done a transaction where you feel that the other agent is standing in the way of making that deal come together, and they're not really counseling their buyer or seller, depending on what side they're on?
Yep.
It's happened to me many times, hundreds of times. And I think over the past couple of years, the market's been so crazy, you didn't have to be a very knowledgeable agent or experienced agent to sell properties.
No.
I mean, let's say it how it is here. And
Yeah.
so I think that's all going to change. I think we've been using buyer agency agreements with our buyers now since 1997. So we're very comfortable with them. We're very comfortable with when we have a buyer consultation of how we present what we're going to do, how we're going to do it to a buyer.
Yep.
So I think with all the changes that we see on the horizon right now for this industry, it's going to eliminate, that's when I say opportunity, it's going to eliminate a lot of people that are not used to the tough deal, because there haven't been any tough deals.
I always say it's having a difficult conversation, right? I feel like good agents are good at having difficult conversations in those tough deals, and that's what I think distinguishes really great agents from agents that are able to capitalize on a good market. Is that people can get in and problem solve and help the clients get to the ultimate goal, which is buying or selling the home.
Right.
But I agree with you. There's too many. I think probably the biggest, or one of the biggest issues from my standpoint is just the barrier of entry. It's far too easy to get a real estate license, especially in the state of Massachusetts. You take a weekend course and you pass an exam, and then you can go the following Saturday and try and help somebody make the largest investment that they may make in their entire life, which that to me makes no sense.
In 12 hours of continuing ed every 2 years is a joke.
I'd say it's different if you're out there and you're selling hundreds of millions of dollars of real estate in those 2 years, but if you've done 2 transactions to then step in and be able to keep it. But I think that's all part of the industry. You've seen, just to get back to your career, spanning over 30 years, you've done a ton of things. Even here, you've been a real estate coach, and you've coached a lot of people that have gone on to have some pretty successful careers in real estate.
I have. The other thing I might mention is a lot of the coaching students that I had were from Australia and New Zealand.
Yep.
And there, you either represent the seller or the buyer. I don't know if you're familiar with how they do a transaction there, but they don't have a private treaty. Everything goes to auction. the third or fourth week after the property comes to market.
Yeah.
So for the first 3 weeks, the property is open for 1 hour on a Saturday afternoon. People come through like an open house, they preview it. And then the fourth weekend, there's an auction at the property. So it's basically the final offer concept, but in person. So the bidding goes on, and everybody can see what everybody else is bidding. And
Yep.
so the buyers all have the same opportunity.
Same information. Yep.
Exactly. I just see that in a different format coming to us now with the platform, with Final Offer platform.
Yeah. I remember I always talked to the guys about, back in the day, there was a Schweppe model. I don't know if you remember that name at all, but he was around in 03, 04 and down markets. And at the time I was at Coldwell Banker, and they brought him as a trainer. And he always preached on putting energy pricing on your listings, right? So taking a number that's going to be a perception of value and putting that on as the list number to drive people to the listing and sell it faster. And a lot of times that would lead to multiple bids, right? Because you were taking what was out there. You weren't chasing the market that was out there 6, 12 months ago. You were looking at what was currently there, and you were pricing it a little bit under. And more often than not, it led to better results. And I think it's a good way to price it, especially as you're in a transitioning market.
Exactly. And even now, you see it yourself, that as busy as the market is, and even in the past year, if the property was priced too high, it's going to sit there, even
Yep.
in this fast-moving market. And that alone put a little bit of a black cloud over that particular property, because people right away know if that property was on the market more than one weekend, something was wrong with it. And
Right.
I still today have people asking me, why has that property been on for 11 days? 11 days.
I
That's
know.
not even normal in a normal market.
Right.
So
And
giving that sense of urgency.
And I think that's, when you look at what Final Offer does, I always talk about you want to price it right. We looked at one of the markets we work in the other day, and the list to sale price ratio was at 96%. Right?
Interesting.
And so what we took from that was once you price the property properly, it's going to move. But to your point, the things that are overpriced, that aren't priced well, are going to sit. And so how do you then go and put a number on something that is going to attract a lot of attention to the property and garner multiple bids, and maybe underprice it even a touch to get it to be bid back up? And I think Final Offer is the perfect platform to come in and achieve those type of results, because you can't underprice the property with Final Offer if you run it when you get things going. And I think that's been a big draw for my clients as we've talked to them about getting a little bit more aggressive with the pricing coming out of the gates and saying, hey, we're going to expose this to everybody and we're going to give everybody a shot. And I think establishing that type of process for people is important.
Absolutely. I do think that right now it's a little bit difficult to price properties. I don't know if you agree or not, but I think that because of everything that's gone on, I think that, and it's quieted down a little bit, not much because it's still very busy, but you really have to give it a lot of thought and a lot of digging and a lot of searching for your comps and so forth before you put a property on the market today.
Yeah, no, I think it's been tougher, at least from our standpoint. It's been a lot tougher to predict what's going to sell quickly and what's going to sit there. Sometimes I feel like you have something that you think is going to be a dog and it's going to be on the market for 6 months and it moves right away. But I think that's been a good backstop for us. So back to your career and different things that have gone on with agency, with the threshold and then the agency change and all those things. What type of changes do you see coming with these recent lawsuits that have popped up with NAR and some of the big box brokerages?
I see a lot of changes. I think it was inevitable for this to happen. I still, again, back to the buyer-broker agreement, we'd never take a listing without a signed contract. Why would we ever put a buyer in our car or work with a buyer that we weren't in an exclusive contract with? I do believe that everybody gets paid from the transaction. I always liken it to a putting all the money in a wheelbarrow, bring it into the closing table, dumping it on the table, and everybody taking their share. The seller, the listing agent, the selling agent. So it's all coming from the transaction. I
Right.
think I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for the professionals in the industry that do this full time that are not going to get caught up with. To me, it's a mindset that aren't going to get caught up with, oh my God, how am I going to even begin to tell the buyer they have to pay my fee? I think the biggest stumbling block that somebody's got to figure out is that if the feds would ever allow that buyer fee to be put in the mortgage as a closing cost, because you're going to have FHA buyers and you're going to have VA buyers. VA buyers, as we know, can't put any money down. They can't pay for any of those fees. So what happens there? How does somebody working with a VA buyer? VAs are my favorite people to work with. How do I get paid? That's going to be a little bit of a snaggle. But other than that, to me, it makes sense. Would you ask your neighbor to pay for your doctor's appointment or your attorney's appointment or your CPA's appointment? No, it's
Right.
ridiculous. Why should it all be coming out of the seller's end? I just think it's a mindset that people are going to have to learn how to shift, and they're going to learn pretty quickly that if they don't get a buyer agency agreement signed, they're not going to get paid.
I think the other thing that's going to come of it too is you're actually going to have to bring some value to the transaction.
Absolutely.
Because if someone's going to actually reach into their pocket and stroke you a check at closing or wherever it ends up coming from, but if it's going to be the buyer's responsibility, that buyer agent's going to have to be held to a level of accountability for their services.
Right.
And I don't see that existing today. I think when you talk about agency changes throughout the years, you think about what the internet had done and what it's actually done to buyer agency, and I think that's where a lot of the cloudiness comes in.
Our buyer agency contract, we have a minimum number of apples that need to be paid to us at a closing, so that if we're only being offered X amount of apples through MLS and it's not what we're requiring in our agency contract, the buyer is making up that difference. And we've been doing this for years.
Right.
So
this change isn't really a change for you guys. This is you've been doing business the right way for all these years, and probably I would think that you've got to be bringing your clients a higher level of service for them to agree to pay you that. The difference of, you're saying if MLS is offering out 2% and you guys are locked in at 2.5%, the buyer is going to come up with another 0.5 point.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. I think that's great. I think there's too much cloudiness with all these lead generation sites, whether it's Zillow, whether it's Redfin, Trulia, that are driving buyer leads and then handing them off to not the most qualified people, but the people that are willing to pay the most.
Correct.
And we run into it a lot of times, and I don't know if it's the same for you up there, but we run into a lot where you can actually see them meeting outside, and they almost still live by the threshold rule, because if they hold their hand and walk into the front door, now all of a sudden it's their client, right? They're procuring cause. So I think all of those things are going to change. And I think, look, you guys are accustomed to it. You've obviously trained all of the agents that are working for you on how to have this type of conversation.
Yes, and it's second nature to them. So we haven't hired over the years. We've never hired, I think in my entire career, I think I've only hired 2 or 3 at the very most agents from other companies. And the reason for that is that we try and recruit outside of the industry, but from other sales industries. Because the worst thing you can say to my ears is, we didn't do it that way where I used to work. But the new people, you can train them, they put the blinders on, and you say, look, if you do it the way I'm telling you to do it, you're going to make a lot of money. If you don't, then maybe this isn't the place for you. So anyway, our people are very seasoned. None of them have black cord fever. Nobody's afraid to pick up the phone.
Like that black cord fever. I've hired the same way. I've always taken people that have come from different industries with transferable skill sets. right?
Yes.
And for the same reason, because I don't want bad habits. I think it's tough for people to break them. And how you've done a great job in terms of branding all your agents and doing business the right way. But how have you gone? We came up and visited your office, and I think it's probably one of the nicest real estate office I've ever been in. How did you go about figuring out your brand and getting that end of the business all dialed in and building that brand that's a household name up on the North Shore?
It's a lot of work. When I started in this area in the Andovers, it was in the late 80s, and it was a good old boys club. And no, not to be putting a ribbon on but that's the way it was. And I started back then. This is another one, Polaroid camera. There were no colored feature sheets. There was none of that. Everything was black and white. I started way back then doing Polaroid photos of my houses and making up my own feature sheets with colored photos and so forth. There were not color copy machines back then. If there were, they were like $5 a copy or whatever. But anyway, long story short, I tell you what, every single person that I ran into, I talked about real estate. I never went anywhere, even to a funeral, without a business card. If I was standing pumping gas in my car, I would start talking to the people that were next to me and handing out a business card. I always wore it. You don't see people with name badges anymore, but back then, wore a name badge everywhere, especially with the supermarket, because when you're in everybody wants to talk about real estate. So
Yep.
It was one thing, and I think I was one of the first ones to start with personal branding, with photos on everything, photos on my business cards, photos on the signs, photos on everything. And after a while, it paid off. People remember, people are visual. People remember what they see. So when I see a business card even today without a photo on it, you know what? I'm never going to remember that agent. If I see a photo on a card, and that could just be I'm older now, but no, I won't remember you as much as I'm going to remember the person that I have a business card with a photo on it. So
Sure.
It's just about letting people know what you do and being consistent with it.
Yeah. Yep. And then with the way that things have changed over the course of time, are you doing encouraging your agents to do more social media, or are you saying just, hey, get out and build it the same way that I did, grassroots, and be out there and shaking hands and talking to people and constantly networking?
Yeah, I'm still a believer. Old school for me is this eye contact.
Yep.
Face to face is the best. It's funny, I just had some new door hangers made, for door knockers for my people. And it's basically for them to, before their open houses on the weekend, to go around and hang a hanger on doors. And it basically said, I'll show you one if you could.
I'd love to see it.
So somebody's gonna turn this around. It's just, and on the other side, it basically said, interested in buying or selling. In the near future, you're invited to our open house. I tell my agents, the neighbors are your best resource. Let them know. They might have friends or family that want to be in their neighborhood.
Sure.
So basically, send them an invitation. Start your open house a half an hour early. Invite them a half an hour early and make them feel special. Silly, stupid things like this, but if you're consistent with it, it really does pay off. And then there's a perforated side here, and their information is here so they can save it. And I'm still big on writing thank you notes. I write handwrite thank you notes every Monday morning after an open house to the people that came through the open house. People are going to open them. Nobody sends personalized notes anymore.
I agree, 100%. The door knocker, I think the door knocker is great. I think even as you start to get more listings out there with final offer too, we've been doing that a lot in a couple of the listings where we've done it. We've invited the neighbors, and the neighbors have been able to get on and follow the offers in real time, and it's been a great touch point for me personally with that. And we've been able to drive a little bit more business from that. So in terms of the changes that you see coming, you think that it's going to move away from the seller paying both sides of the commission?
I think eventually that will happen. Yes.
And so that in that instance, the strong agents would have to be the ones having the conversations or real conversations with the buyers to tell them exactly what they're doing in the transaction.
But I also think, Kevin, that there's more opportunity for us to make more money. Because
Couldn't agree more.
If sellers paying one side of the transaction, they're going to be doing a jig and excited that they're paying less. And over the past few years, there's been a lot of discount brokerage that have come online.
Yeah.
And so there's always been a downward pressure on our commission structure. I think there'll still be a pressure in some instances with some agents or companies. But again, I believe that's all between your ears. If you don't know and understand the value that you bring to a transaction, you don't belong in this business.
Yeah, that's a conversation that I've had weekly with people as we've gone out and talked to them and shown them final offer, and people have said, "Hey, that's going to eliminate the agent." That's their initial response, right? And my response is, "What's your value proposition?" Right? Because if your only value proposition is just writing an offer and sending it for a DocuSign, you will be eliminated, right?
Absolutely.
Because you're not bringing anything to the transaction. But to your point, you're educating the client, you're advising them, you're helping them navigate difficult situations as they go through all of it. And that's the value that you get. And I always say the education piece of it, like, people aren't ready to make an offer until they feel educated in the market.
Exactly.
And so if you can start that education process and people trust you, I think that's the other thing, Pete. You've got to earn the client's trust before they're ready to do anything in terms of making offers on property. So there's just so much that goes into it. And I think from our standpoint, the internet's clouded some of that, and we feel like the timing was right for final offer coming into play, and all of the recent news that's come out here, I feel like has just shined the spotlight on final offer a little bit more in terms of what the consumer will demand from their agent moving forward.
It's interesting because our second listing that's using final offer, she's been following the lawsuits. And she brought that up at our consultation. And she said to me, "I don't really think I want to pay out." So this is my first encounter. "I don't really think I want to pay out what would normally be expected. I might pay something, but I don't want to pay anything." And I let her know that right now our MLS does not allow us to put zero in for compensation. We could offer $1, $100, $500, whatever. But I said the best part about this is with final offer, you put that on your terms and what you're looking for. And it's right there in plain sight. So everybody's going to understand that their buyer agent is going to have to be the one to pay them.
That's paid. And I think that's a big piece of the transparency. I think when I look at what's going on in the industry right now, I look at it and I say, okay, this is about 2.5 on the surface. The issue is the seller paying buyer's agent, right? But when I look at what's at the core of this issue, it's just a lack of transparency throughout the industry.
They don't know how we get paid.
No.
That's the thing. They have no clue. They have no clue that we might show them 50 houses. We're not getting paid.
Right.
We don't get paid until something closes. And
right.
I think that people need to understand.
Right. Yeah. And I don't think it's happening at it's definitely not happening with your company, where you guys are having, buyer agent consultations and taking all the right steps and educating the buyers. But I think there's certain situations where a buyer comes in and they're represented from a quote unquote buyer's agent, and they have no idea who that agent's representing in the transaction. They have no idea who's getting paid, how much they're getting paid, what they should be doing for them. And they walk them over the threshold, right?
Yeah.
And then they disappear and they show up looking for a check. And I think that's at the core of the bigger issue, is just the lack of transparency that's out there on the internet. You go to Zillow, I could click on your listing, trying to get in touch with you, and I end up with someone that's 30-minute ride from your listing in Andover who now wants to show me the property, and all I'm trying to do is get to you. And
Well, they don't understand either. They don't understand. They think they want to talk to the seller's agent. They don't understand that agent is not representing them. They're representing the seller.
That's right.
So it gets very convoluted, very convoluted.
Or that agent's just trying to put a deal together as fast as they possibly can.
Exactly.
And move on to the next. And so
Exactly.
I think that goes back to the successful agents that are in the industry that will take the time, develop and nurture the relationships with their clients so that they do in fact become clients for life. So that in what you've told me, it seems like you guys have almost positioned yourself for this day to come, right? Where you've been training your agents to do things this way. And if that does change, it just goes back to it's just business as usual for you that following Monday, which I think is great.
I tell my agents all the time, we live in a very litigious world today. And if I can give them one piece of information, document everything, every conversation. Just carry a notebook around with you or your phone, or if you want to do it that way. Document everything. So I think that's really, we have more listing forms than most companies have that have all evolved over something happening over the years that, drove us to create that form to be signed. We try and, cover ourselves as best as possible with making sure we have everything, everybody understands everything clearly.
And I think that's the biggest piece, right? As long as everyone understands what they're doing as they come in to buy real estate, to make this type of an investment, if there's a clear understanding of who's getting paid and who's representing who,
Right.
I don't think any of these issues that we're talking about today exist. Thank you. Before I let you go here, we have to two things. One, I've heard through the history of all of the agents that you've trained, there have been a couple big name people that started out training with you.
Okay.
And I was told to ask you who your most successful client was post-training.
Gosh, does it have to be from around here?
No.
So one of my coaching students who is from Westchester, New York,
Yeah.
I coached her for maybe 11 or 12 years, and she ended up being, I'll say she's probably my most successful story. She was probably my best student. I mean, she really put the blinders on, did everything I told her to do. We talked for 15 minutes every week. She ended up representing the Ritz residences in Westchester and has since done a few other major high-rise New York buildings. So she's a very close friend of mine. Her name is Nancy Kennedy. If you're looking for a referral in that neck of the woods, she's the only one to go to. This is not brain surgery that we do, Kevin,
Yeah.
you should know. If we can put an ideal day together and an ideal week and live by it and do the basics and not forget the basics, how about please and thank you?
Right.
That doesn't cost anything. I think that success is right around the corner. But you have to be willing to put your nose to the grindstone. But again, it's just basics. Remember, unlike a department store, we don't have to invest in a lot of inventory to sell. Okay? We invest in ourselves to be able to acquire the inventory that we then put out there. But we're not putting dollars or writing a check for the inventory that we sell.
Totally.
We're so lucky. This industry, there's no glass ceiling in this industry. That's what I love about it.
Yeah, the sky's the limit, right? You
is.
show up and you reap the benefits of how hard you're willing to work.
Exactly.
And I think that's what's attracted a lot of people to the industry, or a lot of people that have been successful in the industry.
Yeah.
Do you still do any coaching today?
Just with my people here,
Just
my
with your
team
team.
people. Yeah, at one point, my husband was, I think, coaching 57 agents. I was coaching probably half of that. I was probably coaching 30. And we did it for a long time. And we saw a lot of people grow, and people that we still talk to 3 or 4 times a year and even spend time with. Yeah, it's very gratifying to be able to give that back.
Were you still selling real estate while you were coaching as
Oh,
well?
absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, because my belief, Kevin, is that there's some great coaches around the country, but if you're not in the trenches every day doing something, I don't think you can read a lot, you can talk a lot, you can believe you could know the real estate business, but if you're not doing it every day, I don't believe you're experiencing the same things that the agents that you're coaching are experiencing every day.
Right.
The real life, the reality, not what on Selling Sunset in some of these programs.
Yeah.
I always say at the end of the day, I say to my team once a day, I say the camera should have been behind me today for whatever that incident might have been, but we're the reality.
Right. No, I agree with you. I mean, I think if you're gonna, you've got to, like you said, you've got to be in the trenches. You've got to be in the day to really understand what's going on in the industry. And I think it's helping people solve problems, right? And stay, and probably more importantly, stay accountable. If you had one piece of coaching advice to give to agents that are out there listening, what would that be? If they said, "Hey, Lillian, I want to build a successful business today. What should I be doing?"
My biggest piece of advice is start every day from zero, like you have nothing on the books. Even to this day, no matter what I have on the books, I get up in the morning and I have nothing. I have to, by the end of the day, I have to have achieved something that will lead to a dollar productive activity that's going to put money on the table. But I start every day from zero. And I also believe that you have to have no matter what you're doing, whether it's making pizzas or selling real estate, you have to have a passion for what you're doing. If you have a passion, it's not a job. And people, and that energy really transmits to whether it's a buyer or seller or anybody that you're face to face with. It's a numbers game. If you're doing the work to do the numbers, you're going to be successful.
I agree with you. I think it's in line with some of the best advice that I got when I got into the industry, which was so simple. It's just, they said, show up ready to work every day and treat people well.
Get up, dress up, and show up. Those are
Yep.
the three. Yep.
Yeah, that's funny. Listen, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, and I know you're busy, and I appreciate you taking the time out of the day, and I'm glad we were finally able to connect.
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate the opportunity.
No problem. Thank you, Lillian, and I look forward to seeing you soon. And if there's anything I can help with as you get rolling with Final Offer, definitely feel free to give me a call.
I sure will.
All right.
All righty.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.